Book number 6 of the ones that I read on the PBS Great American Read is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, published serially 1945 to 46, and then as a novel in 1951. And this is actually a book that played a pretty large role in getting me interested in going into writing myself because I read it in high school English, and then we had an assignment to basically it was really about just getting into the head of the main character, Holden Caulfield, and just to try to figure out what he would think if he was at our school and seeing all the stuff that was going on. And I really found it this fascinating process, which I got a good grade on. And it just got me thinking, could I actually do something like this on my own and maybe even come up with a character or two that the same kind of thing will be worth doing? And I don't know if I've accomplished that quite yet, but I still owe it quite a bit in getting me on this path that I'm on now. So I do owe it for that, and it has a special place for me. And on top of that, it's pretty darn good. Now, this book really holds a really interesting place in history because if it was published today, it would be like a young adult targeted thing, no question. But in the 40s, that designation just did not exist. And books were either for adults or for kids, and so it was intended just for adults. But at the same time, it's about this very disaffected, alienated high school student who's about to flunk out, and a lot of teenagers and 20 somethings really found themselves relating to that, and so it got this whole popularity that Salinger never intended, and it's now considered like the kind of first great young adult book by a lot of people. And it fits in pretty well there, and no matter what age you read it, I think. Although you might want to hold off on introducing your kids to it because there's a lot of swearing and really adult themes in it. So just be warned if you haven't read it yet. So the book is really kind of reminds me of kind of the same thing that Martin Scorsese does in a lot of his movies, where there's just you're introduced to this guy, and he has this whole bunch of personality quirks around him, and you just follow him through this certain period, maybe just a few days, maybe a year or so, but it's maybe even more. But it's just this whole bunch of stuff that he does that maybe doesn't add up to that much plot wise, but if the writer does their job, the character is good enough that it carries you through the whole thing, and you maybe do get something out of it. And Holden Caulfield is definitely that. The big advantage we have is that Salinger was a recluse, famously, and he never really spoke that much about what he intended the book to be. So everyone is just free to come up with their own ideas about it. And my own is that we're really not supposed to like Holden that much. If this term existed at the time, he would definitely be called a hipster. He's this guy who thinks he's just better than everyone around him and smarter, even though he's substantially not. And he's constantly asking questions about these really weird things that all the adults around him are just weirded out by. And sometimes he gets answers, sometimes he doesn't. But either way, it's just this very odd thing to read about and maybe even base a book around. But his whole narrative voice is just fascinating through this whole thing because is a lot of swearing, like I said before, a very shocking amount for a book from that time. And it broke a lot of boundaries in that way. But more than that, it serves a purpose because near the end, we find out the meaning of the title, where he's completely misunderstood the nursery rhyme and somehow got the idea that it's about saving people from falling off a cliff. And he's taken that in his very hipsterish teenage egotistical way and appointed himself as kind of this moral guardian for all children everywhere. It's really weird, but you can still absolutely see this kind of teenage idiot mindset coming up with this idea and making themselves out to be a lot more than a lot better in the world that they really are. And his last action is to scrape out some graffiti that has the F word in it, the only time it appears in the book. So is actually appropriately shocking. There's a nice tip for any of you who want to know how to make profanity actually work the way it's supposed to. But uh, he doesn't really learn anything, and he's just keeps going on his merry way at the end. But we have feel like we have learned something just by reading about him, even if it's "Don't be like this guy," as I'm sure some people get out of it. But there is still this core of something relatable in there, just enough that I don't really see it that way. And I think about stuff like him hiring a prostitute, but then just completely getting cold feet and letting her go, or waking up to find that his old teacher is rubbing his head and getting freaked out, thinking the guy's a pedophile. Boy, is that scene ahead of its time. But um, that's just really not more plot wise to talk about here. It's just all about the character and the writing style, and both of them are very much worth your time. If you haven't read this book, I don't know anyone who really hasn't, but if you haven't, go ahead and check it out as long as you know what you're getting into, and that you may be forced to spend some time with this little snot-nosed kid that you may not like very much, but the writing style itself is just awesome, and it's something I come back to occasionally just to see what I can learn from it, because there really hasn't been much else like this ever since, and because no one else really can match that same kind of tone that Salinger came up with. And it's a shame that it's really all he's known for, because he did do a whole lot of other great stuff. Anyone who's seen BoJack Horseman knows about that. But uh, if there was one that he'd have to be known about, I am glad it's this one, and I imagine he wouldn't be too unhappy with it either. So that's all I have to say about this one. Go check it out. I highly recommend it. And next time we get a pig and a spider, and what actually can you build out of that? Something incredible that can work for any age in Charlotte's Web.